In this section, we will go over how to do Chicago-style citation for secondary sources. Now, before talking about how to cite, I need to talk a little bit about why you should cite and when you should cite. So first of all, you need to cite because it allows people to know what sources you used so they can use them too. And if you don't cite properly, they may not know what source it is, right? When I have checked papers before, sometimes someone will give a title and an author, but it won't be clear if they're talking about a book or a journal article or whatever, right? So if you don't know whether something is a book or journal article, it makes it that much harder to find it, right? You may recall that in previous lectures I've talked about, hey, when you're doing research, look at the bibliographies of recent books. That will tell you what sources are important, what sources you should be looking at. It just makes sense then that you should also put your sources in proper citation and get in the habit of doing so that people, if they want to, can follow and use the sources you have used. Right? When you cite something properly and everything is in its proper place, people who know what they're doing can instantly tell what kind of document you're referring to, and they'll be able to find it easily. Right? And that's key. You want people to be able to find the sources used easily so they can use them too. But also, it allows people to check to make sure that the sources say what you claim they do. Someone could conceivably make up stuff, or they might misunderstand something, right? And sometimes you want to check up on people. I have done that before, right? I've checked up on what people have said, and I'll talk a little bit more about this shortly. But you need to make sure to do that. People need to know what sources you use. They need to be able to find them easily. But also it just shows that you know what you're doing, right? Imagine if you met someone who claimed to be a baseball fan, but they didn't know what a strike was, or they didn't know what it means, what a ball is, right? In reference to, 4 balls and you get a walk, right? You would say, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Well, same thing in history. If you do not know the proper terminology, if you don't know the proper format for citations, people are going to look at your work and say, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, right? Moreover, it's usually connected to better papers. People who pay attention to citation, who do a good job of citation, generally write better papers. I think it's because of their habit of paying attention to detail, right? And as the saying goes, the devil's in the details. Careful reading of sources, careful citation of sources, those usually go together. So for these reasons, it's very important to cite properly. And you need to be very careful, right? You need to be very careful about your citations, because especially when I see a sloppy citation, especially a citation where I can't tell what source it is, that's a red flag for me. And several times I've tracked down those citations and found out that a student was not using the source properly, or was even using it in a misleading way. I don't know if it was intentional or intentional, or unintentional or intentional, but it was misleading, right? And when I see a really sloppy format, that makes me say, oh, something's up here, and I'm going to look into it. And to give you one example, a student cited a newspaper article incorrectly. They included a web link that didn't work. So I took the time. I went through and found the link, and I found out that they had used the article improperly. They had not checked the articles around that article, so they completely missed the historical context. And I brought this up in the presentation, right, at the defense, and pointed this out to the student. In another case, a student cited an article, and the article seemed really weird to me, so I looked it up, and I found out this person was using this improperly. Right, so you want to be very, very careful about this. Right, you want to cite properly, and usually if you take the time to cite properly, you're also going to take the time to read properly, and that way you'll avoid any embarrassing incidents like that. Now, when should you cite? Well, when you quote someone, of course, when you refer to a particular source, when you summarize someone's ideas, when you refer to numbers, right? If you say a number, we want to know where you got it. But the big thing is, when in doubt, cite, right? When in doubt, cite. Doing so will help you to avoid plagiarism, right? You don't want to, it's possible when you're writing, for example, to take someone's ideas and then write them in your own words and then forget that you got it from someone else. And someone may say, hey, wait a second, that sounds a lot like what this author said, and you didn't cite it. You're guilty of plagiarism. And stuff like that has happened before. And sometimes plagiarism, in a sense, is unintentional. It's because someone's not taking the proper time. Unintentional or intentional, it's a major academic issue, so you want to avoid it. One way you can do that is do not wait to add footnotes, right? Do not wait to add footnotes. Don't necessarily have to get them 100% proper citation, but when you are borrowing someone's ideas and for your background, go ahead and put in a footnote noting where that information came from. You can go through and put it in the exact proper style later. But do not wait till the end of your paper to add footnotes, right? Do it as you go through. That way you will not, and I have to tell you, I'm speaking from experience where I have wrote something down and could not remember for the life of me where I got it from. And it took me a lot of time to go back and find the information. Would have saved me a lot of time just to have added the information there for the footnote when I was writing the notes down. Sometimes students will copy the footnote or bibliography information from another book or from a website or from something like that. You can do that, but double check it. Because sometimes they don't follow the right format. Sometimes they don't follow the format I want people to follow. So for example, students will add like to a journal article online, they'll add like a website. That's not required by Chicago Style. You should not do that, right? So that's why I say, I was a child of the 90s. Well, I wasn't a child then, but I watched X-Files. And the motto there was trust no one. And that's true here. Don't just take someone else's bibliography or footnote at face value. Make sure yourself that it is correct, right? So you can take a recent book and use their bibliography, use their footnotes to try and to start your format, but then double check to make sure that it's in proper Chicago style. It might not be, right? And you need to double check that. And especially don't trust programs that claim to automatically do it. I've had bad luck with them. I've had students have bad luck with them. You want to make sure, take the time to make sure that it is correct. One thing we also have to stress is that there's a difference between how you cite a work in your bibliography and how you cite it in your footnotes, right? There is a difference. They're minor differences, and I'll try and point them out as we go along, but they are different. You want to make sure that you preserve those differences, right? So your footnotes need to follow footnote citation. Your bibliography needs to follow bibliography style citation. Don't mix them up, right? And I've had students like mix them up. They'll use footnotes for bibliography, book bibliography for footnotes, and so forth. Make sure that you do them properly. Now, the simplest Chicago style is just a straight out book. This is like a monograph written by a single author, right? So let's have a look when you're doing the footnote. We'll work on the footnote first. So when you write the footnote, you would write the author's first and last names. So for example, Malcolm Gladwell, then a comma, then the italics to mark the title of the book, right? And there's usually a title, subtitle, title of the book, colon, then subtitle. Then in parentheses, the place of publication. Now, sometimes they will list multiple places. It'll say like New York, London, Boston, or something like that. You take the first city. That's the only one you need. You don't need to give me all. Just give me the first city. Colon, publisher's name, comma, date of publication, ending parentheses, and then the page numbers that you're referring to. Now, if you're referring to the whole book, you don't need to do that. But if you're doing a quote, you need to give the page numbers. You need to be able to find that quote. And there you have a nice little example of what that might look like. So let's say that you want to put the footnote format for this book, The Abacus and the Sword, The Japanese Penetration of Korea, 1895-1910, written by Peter Deuce. And they have the title here, they have the subtitle, they have the name. You can see it says University of California Press. Oh, they got 3 cities. You just need Berkeley, right? But they don't have the year. And that's one thing that really frustrates me about American publishers. Korean publishers don't do this. Korean publishers have all the information you need on one page. American publishers have it on several pages. But in any case, if you were to flip the page, you would see here on the left where I've got the arrow, the year. A little hard to read, but it's 1995. So the footnote for this then would be Peter Deuce, comma, The Abacus and the Sword, colon, and you might recall that the Abacus and the Sword is written in a larger font. That's how you know it's the title, and then the subtitle was written in a smaller font, The Japanese Penetration of Korea. Notice that there was also years. The way that you would do that then is you would add a comma before the years, right? So the title, colon, subtitle, if there's years, you add the comma, and then the years. Then you would say Berkeley, in parentheses, is the city, colon, University of California Press, comma, 1995, closing parentheses. Now, here's the key thing. You absolutely have to use the software that makes footnotes. Do not try and just add them yourself at the bottom. It will mess up the formatting. You absolutely need to use the software to make a proper footnote. And the thing is, doing so is actually quite easy. I have Microsoft Word open here. And let's say that I want to put the footnote after that period after textbook. And you can see I've got an arrow pointing to the period. I would put the cursor after the period. And then I would go up there and click insert footnote. And it will then insert a footnote, right? That's how you want to do it. Don't try and add them yourselves at the bottom. Don't try and use the footer. Use insert footnote. That will make it so that what happens is if you move the footnotes around, they will automatically renumber. The footnote will follow the text properly. It makes your life very easy. Make sure you do it right the first time, right? Use the insert footnote, and it's under the references tab, right? It's under the references tab. Now, one thing that is a little difficult to demonstrate is that when you're using page numbers, you don't actually use a hyphen. Anytime you use a page range, you do what's called an end dash. And the way that you would do that is you would write the first year or the first page number, because this also goes with years. Anytime you have a range, you should use what's called an end dash, not a hyphen. So you'd write like 1895, space, hyphen, space, 1910, just like what I've done there on that first 1895, 1910. Then after you write 1910, press another space, and the hyphen will automatically turn into an end dash, right? And that's what's happened there on that second 1895, 1910. Then you can just go back, delete the spaces, and then you've got the right end dash, right? And that's what you should do with years and page numbers. You should not use hyphens, right? Use an end dash. A lot of people don't get that right. As an aside, one reason I'm kind of, what can I say, hyper about these things is I help edit a journal. And that is a rule that is supposed to be followed in Chicago style, but people, even professionals, sometimes struggle with it. So this is one way you can kind of show off, in a sense. You can say, look, this is incorrect. It's supposed to have a end dash, not a hyphen. Make sure you do it in any case. Now, the bibliography style for a book is pretty simple. This time it's author's last name, comma, first name, then in a period, then title book, subtitle book in parentheses, period. Notice that where there have been commas in the footnote style have become periods. Keep that in mind. Then place of publication, colon, publisher's name, comma, date of publication. There's no parentheses. So the example they give here, Gladwell, comma, Malcolm, period, the tipping point, colon, how little things can make a big difference, all in italics, period, Boston, colon, little, comma, Brown is the publisher, comma, year published, 2000. And the bibliography then is pretty simple for the Deuce book. Deuce, comma, Peter, period, the abacus and the sword in italics, and the rest of the titles in italics, then colon, subtitle, Japanese penetration of Korea, comma, 1895, end dash to 1910, Berkeley, or a period after that, then Berkeley, colon, University of California Press, comma, 1995. Journal articles are actually pretty simple. One thing that makes them a little bit complex is that you have to include the title of the article and the title of the journal. So the way you do this for a footnote, we're doing the footnote first, you would have the author's first and last names, just like in a footnote, just goes in normal order, comma, right? That's the same. But this time you put the title of the article, not the journal, title of the article in quotation marks, right? And the title is pretty much though the same other than not being in italics, because it's title of article, colon, subtitle of article, comma, closing quotation mark. Please note that the comma goes in the quotation mark, right? The comma goes in the quotation mark. In Chicago style, periods and commas go inside quotation marks. Colons and semicolons go outside of quotation marks. Right, so comma goes inside. Then in italics, the title of the journal, then with no punctuation whatsoever, the volume number, comma, issue number, and then in parentheses, the date of publication, colon, not a comma. When you're using a book, you would put a comma after the parentheses, show page numbers, but here you use a colon and then the page numbers. And there you have the example, Alexandra Bogan, comma, quotation marks, gender and alcohol, colon, the Swedish press debate, comma, closing quotation mark. That article appeared in the Journal of Gender Studies. That's in italics. Notice that the volume number, they don't actually write volume or anything like that. An older style Chicago did. They decided to drop that. No punctuation, just put the volume number. Then the issue, then comma, then the issue number, but that has NO standing for number. So NO period 2. Now, a logical thing you may ask is, what's the difference between a volume number and an issue number? The volume number changes every year. So if a journal is in the 10th volume, that means that it's in its 10th year. The issue number changes every issue. And usually what happens is that the issue number restarts every year. So for example, let's say a live journal is only published twice a year. So the Journal of Gender Studies might only publish 2 issues a year. So there would be volume 20, number 1, volume 20, number 2. Then the next year, volume 21, number 1, volume 21, number 2, right? So just remember, volume number, that changes every year. Issue number generally restarts for every volume, right? And then in parentheses, June 2011, that's the month and the year it was published, colon, and then the page that's being referred to. So let's now try a practical example. One nice thing about journal articles is that oftentimes they have everything on the same page, and sometimes they just go ahead and almost do it for you, right? So there you can see at the very top it says Acta Coriana. They have a fancy way of writing the E, but that's an E, those 3 lines. Volume 15, number 1, June 2012, colon, pages 73 to 106, right? So, and then it says the Great Ming Code and the Repression of Catholics in Chosun, Korea, Pierre Emmanuel Rowe. So it gave you all that information right up there up front. How much easier could it be? So here's how you would cite that. And I want to stress, even if you were to get this online, and this article, for example, is freely available on the journal's webpage, so you don't even have to have a database, do not cite it as a web source. Cite it in this way, even though you're not using the paper copy. So for the footnote, Pierre Emmanuel Rowe, he is French, so he has a hyphenated first name. That's his whole name is Pierre Emmanuel. Comma, the Great Ming Code and the Repression of Catholics in Chosun, Korea, comma, and all that is within quotation marks. Now, one thing you'll note is Great Ming Code is in italics here. It was also in italics in the page from the journal I showed you. The reason is because he is actually referring to like a book. It's like a law book. So that's why it's in italics, because it's a book. And you as you know, you refer to books in italics when you bring them up in a paper, right? So he has kept that format. The Great Ming Code, Great Ming Code is in italics. So after all that, you've got Acta Coriana in italics, the name of the journal, 15, right? They wrote volume, you don't. That's not how Chicago Style is done now. Comma, NO for number, period 1, June 2012 in parentheses, colon, and then 73 to 75, because those are the pages we're going to pretend that we're referring to. And notice there's an N dash between those pages. Now, the journal article bibliography format is very, very similar, right? Just like the other. The book, though, you switch the first and last names around, right? Instead of commas, you generally use periods, right? And then the only other thing that really changes that I want to mention is that you give the whole page range. You give the whole page range. So in this case, this article began on page 155. It ended on page 169. People disagree over whether or not you should include the 1 or not. So it just says 155 to 69. You could write it that way. You could also write 155 to 169. Both are acceptable, but you should be consistent. You should always do it the same way in your article, or in your paper that you are writing. And so in the bibliography, there you have it, Rowe, comma, period, Pierre Emmanuel, period. The title in quotation marks with a period instead of a comma at the end. Acta Coriana 15, comma, number, dot, period 1. Then in parentheses, June 2012, colon, then 73 to 106 with an N dash. Remember, that's the page numbers for the complete page range of the journal article. You may say, why do I do this? Because librarians want you to do that, because if you try and get an article on interlibrary loan, they will ask you the page numbers. It makes the librarians' lives much easier. When we make the lives of librarians easier, they make our lives easier by getting us the sources we need. So they will ask that for information, so you need to be able to provide it. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about what this kind of book is later, but there's something called an edited book. And when you cite an edited book, you cite it chapter by chapter. And so if you're going to do that for the footnote, you would list the chapter author's first and last names, right? So similar to a journal article. Then you would put in quotation marks, the title of chapter, subtitle of chapter, comma, quotation mark to end. It's very similar again to what you were doing with the journal article, but here's the difference. You would then write in, lowercase in, then you would give the title of the book in italics, again, subtitle book, comma, ed for period for editor, and then the editor's first and last names. And then you would give in parentheses the place of publication, publisher's name, comma, date of publication, quotation mark, comma, and then the page range that you are citing. So it's a very complicated style. So for example, here's the one they give, Angeles Ramirez, comma, in quotation marks, Muslim women in the Spanish press, the persistence of subaltern images, comma, ending quotation marks. That's the title of the chapter. Then lowercase in what? In the edited volume's title, the title of the book, Muslim Women in War and Crisis, Representation Reality, comma, then the editor, ed, period, and then the name of the editor, Fega Shirazi, and then in parentheses, Austin, University of Texas Press, comma, year 2010, comma, they're referring to page 231. What to me is the most complicated of these citation formats that we're going to be go through in terms of secondary sources is a chapter from an edited volume. So an edited volume is something like this, Japan's Competing Modernities. You'll notice it is edited by this person, Sharon Minicello, right? She's the editor. But you'll notice on the table of contents over there on the right, there are different chapters, each with a different author, right? That's what we call an edited volume, right? Each chapter is written by a different author. It's kind of similar to how a journal works, right? A journal is a collection of articles. This is a collection of chapters. And so it is similar. It's kind of a mix between a book and a journal article citation. But here, I want us to cite this article, Chapter 8, Culture, Ethnicity in the State in Early 20th Century Japan, by my friend and colleague, Kevin Doak. What was funny is I used to try and make his name Japanese and call him Doak, and he finally corrected me and said my name is actually Doak, but for a long time, that is how I referred to him as. And with our other examples, we have this problem. Not all the information we need is on the same page, right? These pages here give us the author's name. It gives us the chapter name. It gives us the who published this, right? It gives us the place of publication, gives us the editor's name, gives us book title. But of course, it doesn't give us the year that the book was published. And just like with the book that we had previously, on this other page, you'll find the year. I've got it marked there with an arrow. It's probably too small to read, but the year was 1998. So if we were to condense this now into a footnote, Kevin Doak, comma, then the name of his chapter in quotation marks, Culture, Ethnicity, and the State in Early 20th Century Japan, comma, quotation mark, in the title of the book in italics, Japan's Competing Modernities, Issues in Culture and Democracy, comma, 1900 to 1930, comma, the editor, ed, period, Sharon A. Minicello, and then in parentheses, the publication information, city of publication, publisher, comma, year, closing parenthesis, comma, in this case, I'm referring to page 134. So this is very similar in a sense to the footnote, of course, but there are some changes. The big change, of course, is commas become periods, right? So, for example, remember how there was a comma within the chapter title? Well, that's now become a period. That means that the in now needs to be capitalized because it follows a period. So IN, capital I, and then you list the title of the book. Also, the other key difference is instead of writing ED period and then the editor's name, you write it edited by. You actually write it out now. As an aside, if you were to be doing something that was translated, if it had a translator in addition to author, you would write translated by and then give the translator's name. Then the other big difference is you have a comma and then that YY hyphen should be an N dash YY. That is the page numbers for the whole chapter. And you need to give that information because, again, if you maybe would have to request a librarian or someone to copy that for you, so you have to give that all that information. The rest of the place publication information, all that stuff stays the same as if it was a book. So then, to give you the concrete example, the bibliography entry would be Doak, comma, Kevin, period. Then the title in parentheses, but this time a period instead of the quotation mark, or instead of a comma. So that means the IN must be capitalized. So in Japan's competing modernities, issues in culture and democracy, comma, 1900 to 1930, all in italics. Edited by, not ED period, but edited by Sharon A. Minichiello, comma, whole page range for the entire book chapter, right? Period. And then Honolulu, University of Hawaii Press, comma, 1998. Now, there's a couple other things we need to talk about. What happens if you cite these sources again in your footnotes, right? What happens if you cite these sources again in your footnotes? In that case, you can write for a subsequent reference when it's clear, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. You can write IBID, pronounced ibid, right? Means in the same place, right? You can use that, right? So if you have a reference to, say, Dr. Doak's book, and in footnote 12, and footnote 13 also refers to his book, you don't have to write out the whole thing. You would just write ibid. So I want to give you some concrete examples of how to use ibid while also introducing the short form. So let's say that in footnote 2, I referred to the Farmwinkle's book and I gave the whole entire footnote reference, right? All that information we just talked about. I talk about a couple other people in footnotes 3 and 4. In footnote 5, I don't have to give the whole long form reference. I don't have to give the full name, the full title, and the publication information. I already gave that. I can actually just give the family name, comma, title, not the subtitle, just the title, comma, page number, right? That makes your life a little bit easier. That's generally what I prefer to do. Some people use ibid. Some people require ibid, so I need to talk about it. But ibid refers back to the next source above the one that you're talking about, right? It's the next footnote above the one that you're on. So number 6 says ibid, that refers to 5, right? It says pages 258 to 59. That's all that changed, right? That's why you write ibid. Ibid takes the place of Farmwinkle, Humor of the Midwest, but we have different page numbers. So we have to add the page numbers. But number 7 ibid, that refers to number 6, right? So it refers to Farmwinkle, but this time pages 258 to 59. Then in number 8, we're referring to a different page range for Farmwinkle, pages 333 to 34. Now in footnote 9, we move to someone else, Losh, right? We'll say perhaps footnote 3 was the first reference to Losh, so once again we have a short form here, that's fine. Notice though, there's this kind of odd thing, it says 1:150. When you see that, that means it's a multi-volume source. There's probably like 3 or 4 volumes of diaries and correspondence. One refers to the volume number. So there's like there's too many diaries, too much correspondence. So they had to publish it in multiple books. Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4. This means look in Volume 1, page 150. But now here the ibid does not refer to Farmwinkle. It refers to the next footnote up, right? The next named footnote up. So you go up from ibid, you go up from 10, that goes to 9, that goes to Losh. Does not go to Farmwinkle. So number 10 does not refer to Farmwinkle, refers to Losh, but this time we're in the second volume, pages 35 to 36. Once again, ibid in footnote 11 refers again to Losh, not to Farmwinkle, right? And this is why I don't like using ibid, because if you move your footnotes around, all your ibids get messed up. I prefer using the short form. But in any case, that's how you would use it if that's what you choose to use. Now, let's say you have a footnote in which you want to refer to multiple sources. In that case, you separate them with a semicolon. So here's an example of a footnote I had in a paper. For examples of the treatment of the Oprah incident in English language sources, as well as some references to Jenkins' role within it, see Che-Young Che, the rule of the Taewongun, and it gives all the information. But notice after the page numbers 114 to 120, I have a semicolon. Then I give Chai-Shik Chung and then another book. And after the page numbers, I give a semicolon. That's how you separate them, right? That's how you separate them. If you have multiple sources, you separate them with a semicolon.